Israa Nasir. Oh, Israa Nas. Welcome.
No, my full name is Israa Nasir.
Israa Nasir. Israa Nasir or Nas. Welcome to the Possible Network podcast. So great to have you here on Zoom. Really good to speak to you, and thanks so much for making the time, because I know you're both busy, and in particular, you, Naz, are exceptionally busy feeding people around the city. So thank you. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Just to introduce you to the audience, Naz, you formed the Migrant Kitchen, and you and the Migrant Kitchen team are providing meals to feed families and healthcare workers working on the front line of this crisis around New York City with meals, and we can come and talk about the work you'll be doing and all the broader work as part of the chef Jose Andres World Kitchen initiative as well. Israa, you are, as I understand it, are a clinically trained psychologist, psychotherapist. Israa, you're, as I understand it, a clinically trained psychotherapist, and you do a lot of work with Asian communities in your sort of private practice, and also have a perspective I think you could be able to share with us in terms of how people are dealing with the mental health impact of this crisis at the moment. But also you work for a healthcare company, a healthcare tech, that gives you an interesting perspective on probably what's happening in the background as we're trying to find vaccines and a cure for this. So perhaps you could both just start by giving a little bit of background beyond what I've said in terms of how you arrived at where you are working, living in New York City, and your specific areas of work and interest.
Sure, so I can begin. Thanks for that lovely intro, and I'm very happy to be here. So I will start by saying my day job, I work in mental health tech, and we are focused on bridging the gap in services using technology for mental health services specifically. And, you know, this move to remote services right now because of Corona has, you know, it's difficult to say, but it has been a good thing for mental health technology, because now you've suddenly seen an increase in services remotely, and more people are able to access therapeutic services for lowered prices. And on the back end, you can kind of see government regulations scrambling to meet that demand. So that's actually a really good thing that's come out of it. My passion project is more around increasing mental health awareness and literacy, and working to reduce stigma around mental health, specifically in Asian communities. So I'm a South Asian woman, and I try to create spaces and generate conversations around mental health, mental wellness, you know, and emotional well-being in as many ways that I can, through workshops, through my writings, and just in my regular life with people around me, just kind of bringing them into conversations.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we'll jump into that in a bit more detail. Naz, let's talk about what you've been up to, the great work you're doing.
The great work I think this entire city is doing, trying to get forward. And of course, you know, like, thanks to you guys, Spirit Mark and Israa, for bringing out the concept of mental health, because I personally heavily struggle with mental health issues. And if it hasn't for, you know, people like you and my therapist in particular, who helped me, you know, come from a very dark place, I wouldn't be here doing the best I can to pay it forward. Essentially, I am one of the 12 chefs in the country that is doing emergency feeding for the United States. I am taking over New York City and New Jersey. We're at 50,000 plates a day.
Wow.
We didn't start at 50,000 plates, but this is the current output now. We also have pledged with the mayor's office for an additional 200,000 meals for the month of Ramadan, which will bring our daily output from our kitchens to 12,000 meals. These entire kitchens are run by some of the best chefs in the country. My mentor, Dan Dorado, and Chef Ryan Graham, the former executive chef of John George, and a team of 6 or 7 undocumented workers, because we're very much open and forward about the fact that we are hiring workers who don't get the benefit of unemployment insurance. And we teamed up with DoorDash, which waived all their fees So we paid the drivers directly. So we have a fleet of 100 cars, and we now teamed up with
amazing.
Chelsea. Yeah. And we teamed up with Chelsea Rentals to provide trucks and refrigeration trucks as we now go forward. So this is a people-to-people, immigrant-to-immigrant disaster relief mission. And it's giving us a lot of training on what to do when unfortunately, I hope we never have to do it again. But, if things happen, hurricanes, disasters, wars, we have now heavily been trained in logistical operations when it comes to providing food.
It sounds like a military standard, a military grade logistics program.
Absolutely. Actually, in the beginning, our lead dispatch, Kelly, had a conversation with a person who I can't name, but he's led the food logistics during the war in Iraq. And we had to basically figure out how to mobilize civilian cars and civilian trucks to deliver food on time, bring it out on time, because it's the same thing as in a war zone. I'm sure they have much more challenges, but nonetheless, the principles or the basics remain the same.
So can you just break down a little bit more into logistics? Because when people hear about this, they go, wow, it's incredible. How do you identify the chefs, source the food in sufficient amounts, keep it fresh, deliver it on time to people who need it? How do you identify the people most in need, and how do you allocate it between healthcare workers and underserved families? There's a lot in there, I know. Sorry.
No. I'm glad you asked that question because I've been talking about it all day. So, okay, to begin, every kitchen that we take must be under above 2,000 square feet, because you can't have more than 10 people in a room, which means the kitchen has to be allocated with social distancing. Allocation of the chefs, we've been in the business for 20 years. We know some of the best chefs in the world. The question is, who was going to donate their time? But for us, it was important not just to cook food. It was important that we talk to our migrant workers, whether they're Pakistani or Palestinian or Latino or whatever, and have deep discussions about food, and then come up with some sort of innovative dish that's very simple and easy to cook, that includes a rice, a bean, and a protein that can be sent out and done in bulk. We already had experience because outside of all of this, I have a restaurant, a Palestinian restaurant on the west side of Manhattan. But more than that, I have a catering company that services all of WeWork locations. So we already were able to scale up and do these kind of recipes in our kitchens. When the shutdown happened, I had 1,000 meals in my fridge. And of course, these things were going to go bad. Now, growing up in Palestine, I already knew that there's going to be food insecurity happening, also going through the 2008 financial crisis. You all know that there is going to be food insecurity. But on a personal level, I was homeless for 6 months last year after a failed business and a failed relationship, and basically I lost everything. And that's before even the restaurant took off. So I was going from shelter to shelter. I was staying on people's couches. So the shelters that I fed first were the shelters that I stayed in. And that was really the most important thing. But of course, as the restaurants shut down on Monday, if you're not a doctor, lawyer, engineer, you're a failure to the family. So in this conversation, Israa is a success. I'm the failure in the eyes of our society, which I'm very proud of her. She's an amazing doctor. So they reached out asking for food, and one person will tell the other, one person will tell the other, and all of a sudden we're feeding entire ER units. I remember the head of the ER unit at Mount Sinai called me and said, I have 300 nurses and doctors that are hungry at the COVID unit. Can you send? And then that number increased within 2 days to 450. We didn't have the money for it. So we launched a GoFundMe that started with $18. If you look at the GoFundMe link, literally on the day it launched, it was $18. And then MSNBC picked up the story and it took off, and that became a national trend. Everybody and their mother jumped on feeding the healthcare workers. Now you don't hear everybody, Joel Andreas, because nobody focused on the healthcare workers up until that trend became a thing when we started it, which is fine because now everybody jumped to feed the healthcare workers, which allowed us to easy up on the hospitals, because doing logistics within hospitals is a nightmare itself. So a lot of the doctors who are getting food, even from World Central Kitchen, they're getting trucks outside the hospital, but they can't just leave the COVID unit to go grab lunch from 9 to 5. We had to figure out internally access within the hospital that does delivery logistics to each unit after we drop off the food in front of the hospital. It's almost like a mapped out food runner inside the hospital. So the way that we did it is that we got some of the best food runners that we worked with over the years and asked them to look at the blueprints of the hospitals and be like, okay, how can they go from here to here to here to here with the jump? And it was just a bunch of Mexican guys that are like, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this.
Incredible.
And yeah, so that's how we were able to get everything out. Now, of course, in terms of getting all the food out in time, we have, like I mentioned, 5 kitchens and 1/6 ghost kitchen that is untouched. In case one kitchen goes down, it can be up in 2 hours. And it was used once last week, not because the kitchen goes down, but a truck driver took 300 meals to the wrong place. And we had to like allocate 300 meals immediately within 15 minutes, which was really awesome. So,
can you just talk about the importance of nutritious food? I think people maybe forget about this, that the amount of hours these healthcare workers are doing.
Absolutely. Like good, healthy, nutritious food is important to anyone, whether it's healthcare workers or the poor. The question I think that I would like to ask is accessibility to nutritious, healthy food, right? So doctors, to be honest with you, whether it's a COVID virus or not, are eating well. They're getting paid okay. And after like the whole trend started, 11 Madison Park and every 3 Michelin star restaurant was sending them food. The question is that who's feeding Pakistani communities in Jackson Heights who are undocumented, cannot go to the hospital in Corona because there's not enough machines and they have lost loved ones to it. I'll tell you a story. We have been feeding the family of a woman named Consensia. Consensia made headlines to American military base visiting her son by ICE, and she was up for deportation. So the legal organization that took her to court, Make the Road, in particular her lawyer, Gabriella, is a close friend. And she said the woman died. She was very depressed from cancer. She left behind her 4 children. We started feeding the families. All of a sudden, we're getting so many calls from people who either lost their jobs or are affected. They're too embarrassed to go stand on a bread line at Wall Center Kitchen or anywhere else. So I'm sending out almost around 200 to 300 meals in a very streamlined taxi service to drop off food to people who are ashamed to come out and give food. And it can grow even more now with people losing their jobs. So the nutritious access here is not about the fact that you're getting healthy ingredients. The problem here is that like how can people pay for food? And then we have to look at the food supply chain from beginning to end. You don't get your avocado for $1 at Whole Foods because you're paying American standard labor, right? To the workers. No, you're getting
you don't get an avocado for $1 at Whole Foods. No, it just doesn't happen. It's $2.99.
You're getting legal exploitation of Mexican farmer workers through NAFTA. I mean, people have to understand these kind of things. People are like, oh, halal meat is okay. I mean, I hate to say this during Ramadan. Please, Israa, don't kill me. But halal meat is awful. Like, it's really awful. And there's a reason behind it. Not because of the halal way it's killed, but because in the United States, there are only 2 producers of chicken, like mass supply, like the Tyson or Purdue.
Yeah.
There's not enough restaurants that supply high-end chickens in the Muslim community. So they get the lower grade chicken, which is the one that's infected with steroid, unless they go to like a small butcher shop and they actually butcher their own chickens, organic style, which is like in Queens. And there are places, but on the large scale of things, that's not the case. So that's why you're getting $1.09 a pound chicken. It's disgusting. And like, so we now have to go.
Which is contributing to the underlying health issues of these communities.
Precisely.
And making them probably more susceptible to the virus.
More the heart disease, not just the virus, to any virus, to anything. Yeah. So it's important to talk about that. And of course, there are the sub-layers of that, food deserts, the fact that kids on 86th Street have better access to food because their school zone pay more taxes versus 97th Street in Harlem, where they're getting like chopped cheese sandwiches, which is literally a sandwich made famous by Anthony Bourdain, but it's a shitty ground beef, like cheese sandwich on a roll, almost like a Philly cheesesteak, invented by Yemeni Deli, actually on 110th Street. They did a documentary on the sandwich. But point here is that accessibility to food is important, and not necessarily just in the United States, but all over the world. In Palestine, I don't talk about hummus for the sake of like who has the right to make hummus. I don't give 2 shits if Israelis make better hummus, right? But what matters to me is who has water access, right? Because we get water once a week in my village. The settlement gets 7 days of water. So when they say, oh, we took a land that was barren and desert and turned it into greenery, I'm like, yeah, you did that by reallocating water for people who couldn't drink and then completely forgot about those people, right? So that's the most important part.
I think it's a good point. I mentioned to you before we started this as a quote I was thinking about when we were preparing for this from Ernest Hemingway's Sovereign Man, which
Oh
I think
yes,
to
I
quote
love
it
it.
is, how do you go bankrupt, Bill asked. Two ways, Mike said, gradually, then suddenly. And a term that's often used by people when they reference that is everything happens slowly, then all at once. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I think what we're seeing at the moment is suddenly this moment of suddenly, both in terms
So
of
yeah,
the
but
injustices that people are
mhm.
experiencing, the consequences of bad food production, social inequities, political inequities, and also the mental health impact of that. So maybe this is a good point that you could both reflect on your perspectives on the mental health issues that our people are experiencing right now, both in the hospitals and in the communities.
Absolutely. This is what I keep discussing with people is that this virus is an equal opportunity attacker, and it exposed capitalism for exactly for what it is. Everything that Bernie Sanders was talking about in the past 3 weeks actually came to light. Access to healthcare, access to mental health care, access to food, access to security, access to job employment, access to rent stability, asking to, all these things that we just don't have in a country. Like if you go to supermarkets right now, the supermarkets at one, like in certain areas look like the supermarkets of the Soviet Union after the fall in 1991. It's like embarrassing, right? For a first world country. It's embarrassing that first world country does not have enough respirators for testing, and that like New Zealand does better than us. I mean, like it's an issue, right? So yeah, I'm glad that this virus brought the sudden effect or the sudden death of all these ideas that were happening before. But unfortunately, will we rebuild? I mean, I don't know. Institutionalized University of Chicago style capitalism is very much embedded in our grain and our DNA at this point in this nation. We're the only nation where labor unions vote Republican. So, I mean, like, I don't know where we can stand on this, right? And the idea that the entrepreneur, I mean, is romanticized, right? But not just in terms of being an entrepreneur, is that the idea of the robber baron is romanticized. And the robber barons are like the Bezos and all these folks, right? Where billions of dollars are okay, while Amazon workers are getting infected and don't get anything. So that's sad.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that, but I just want Israa to maybe just comment on what you're witnessing and what you're experiencing and your perspective, given the work you do with the Asian communities.
Sure. So, in terms of mental health is always something that is prioritized below physical health and below other social determinants of health, such as housing and jobs and food security and all of those things. But what's interesting is when this like collective trauma happens, and even though you might be experiencing job insecurity, you might be experiencing food insecurity, where regularly you have the habit, especially in communities of color, to not focus on mental health because this collective trauma is so large. Even people who don't want to think about it, even people who are not accustomed to talking about mental health, are experiencing the effects of it, and it's getting hard to ignore. So we are definitely seeing a rise in people asking for support and help. So New York State has they have like a 24-hour crisis hotline right now, and it's being manned by volunteers who have a mental health background, and so there's a rise in those calls from all communities. So it's kind of like equalized the need to ask for help. And right now you are not hearing as much, you're not kind of hearing as much stigma around asking for help right now. And now whether this stays beyond is different, because I am hearing a lot of people saying that, okay, this is happening right now, so I need help right now to manage my anxiety about getting the illness, right? The fear is something that is so concrete that people are comfortable in saying, hey, I worry about this, I have anxiety about this, I can't sleep, right? And so it's not this nebulous, almost like invisible fear. This is something that's so concrete that I am seeing people openly talking about it. You know, in my own communities, like in South Asian communities, I am hearing people who are from a different generation, like an older generation, who are openly talking about their struggles right now, which is a refreshing change from before where there was a lot of denial. But I will say, I think as far as health workers are concerned, I'm seeing two big trends. One are folks who are completely debilitated by their anxieties, where they've had to take time off work. And, you know, that's the response that they're having. But a lot of them are also just kind of like on like autopilot. So my sister is a dentist, but she works out of a hospital in Brooklyn. And, you know, so there's just this like stoic, like, we just got to move ahead for like one step in front of the other. And so they're not taking time to process, because if they did, the enormity of the situation would be too much.
So we might start to witness some form of PTSD effect coming out of this.
Absolutely. I think there's going to be a huge spike, especially for the healthcare workers who are in COVID units, because they're having to see really like wartime situations, right? Like shortages of respirators, like having to make difficult decisions, and like just the enormity of having people die alone. I think that's something that's impacting people's emotional space a lot, because if you do unfortunately pass away from COVID, you die alone. There's nobody with you. And that has like a huge emotional impact on the people who are helping. So there's definitely going to be a spike in PTSD-like symptoms. And we're seeing some trends already, but, you know, as long as you're in there, you know, just to kind of, it's almost like being a foot soldier, right? You can't stop to think about what's going on. You just have to forge ahead. So there will be a huge decompression. And even for like non-healthcare workers, there's going to be a huge decompression after, which is why the remote mental health sector is gearing up. I mean, I get alerts every single day for new job postings for telecounselors and telepsychiatrists. And so like the big companies are really, really gearing up to face this.
Couple of things. We interviewed Dr. Courtney Reneke, one of our previous guests, last Sunday, I think it was, and she talked about resilience. And she said it's interesting that if you look at how people are dealing and coping with this anxiety and the stress of it, if you've been brought up in environments and you've been conditioned to difficulty and challenges, you're more likely to just be able to deal with it and confront it. So I'd like your perspective on it. Communities that might be, and particularly you, Nasser, that grown up in a place like Palestine, or whether it's a war zone or people that have been living in food insecure areas, this isn't anything new. So are they better equipped mentally to deal with it, regardless of how hard it is right now? I'd like your perspective on that. And I'd also like to ask you about, because we've had conversations in the past around the taboos that exist within Muslim communities. And I'd like to get your insights into, is there a variance between Shia communities and Sunni communities, depending on the geographical sort of regions people come from, where that taboo, how that taboo varies?
I mean, I hate to say this, I don't say this to my like non-Muslim friends, but although I grew up in a Sunni house, I'm an atheist, but although I grew up in a Sunni household, I do think the Shia are more enlightened. Just my opinion. I think just in general, they're more creative. They're on, like, they have their stuff together. But are we better equipped mentally to accept these kind of things? I would say to a certain degree, yes, but there is also a higher level of endurance, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have also a higher level of PTSD, depression, self-doubt, being broken. One of the things that the Israeli occupation succeeded for 70 years to do is to break the Palestinian ego, right? Not necessarily ego like in terms of like being proud and whatever, but like in the sense of like what we think about ourselves, right? So I grew up in an environment where I think I'm beneath everyone. I think I'm under everyone. I think that the world is better than me, right? We're considered persona non grata in different places. Racist terms that are used against you, right? So in Jordan, for example, back in the day and even till now, they would call Palestinians Belgians. And the reason they would call them Belgians is that during the Civil War, Palestinians were given boots from the Belgian army, and it would say made in Belgium. So they were like, oh, those are like the Belgique. It's a derogatory term at this point, right? In Lebanon, Palestinians are not allowed to work 70 occupations, cannot own property, cannot inherit property, cannot go to court, and they cannot go enter civil services like hospitals and schools, but they must abide by public law. So, for example, there's this exam called the brevet, which is administered in French and English. It's like your high school graduation or entry to high school examination. Palestinian schools or at UN schools in the Palestinian camps don't have the budget to hire French and English teachers, so the kids end up failing. There's a higher rate of illiteracy. And that high rate of illiteracy and miseducation and misinformation leads to society problems. So when we were working in the camps, trying to bring teachers to teach English and French to those kids, which, by the way, the first cohort that we did ended up getting scholarships to Ivy League schools. So the kids are not dumb, it's just that they didn't have access to education. We mental health issues. Why is that? Especially if they're girls, they're just security. So if word gets out, then they have and then they end up in poverty. Trickle down system, but it's like a top down approach and how it really all begins with access to resources, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where it becomes a thing that's to go ask for mental health. Yes, I have vitiligo, I'm bipolar, I struggle with suicide, and I did not get mental health care till I was 30. Right? When my skin started changing color when I was 12 out of depression, people thought it was leprosy, so nobody would touch me, right? So you're in a village, everybody thinks you have leprosy, which is not leprosy. To come 4 years later and they'd be like, oh, you have vitiligo. That comes from manic depression, right? Okay, you're depressed. Now I understand a little bit. Then you go to the States for college, and then you end up as an immigrant in the Bronx, which would happen to me. And then you realize that poverty unites us all, and you get more depressed because like society just tells you can't make it, you can't eat, you can't live. So what do they have access to? Whether in the Bronx or Gaza, it's the same situation.
Yeah, it does bring into sharp relief the American dream and the concept of a land of opportunity, where clearly people are coming to realization this is not.
No, this is not the land of opportunity. This is the land of, I would say, access. If you have access to go to Columbia University and have your parents pay your bills, and you can get your first foot at the door at a big corporation, and then you can end up building your career, you can make something of yourself, right? But if you're going to end up on 149th Street and Soundview Avenue, right, where you're probably going to get shot by the age of 16, or if you're in Gaza under siege, with no opportunity to work, no opportunity to live, and the only way that you can find your way into some sort of livelihood is through Hamas, and where are you going to end up?
Yeah.
You know, and that happens across the board. It happens with Latinos too. Like, people just are not born to become drug cartel members. It's poverty that drives you there.
So in these communities, Israa, are you seeing that, I mean, this taboo in real time, even in communities in New York City, where mental health isn't accepted and acknowledged and dealt with?
Could you say the first part of your question? I feel like
Am I breaking up, by the way?
Just a little bit right in the beginning.
Yeah, because my internet's been really patchy last week.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if, given what Nasser was saying there about these communities in New York City, if the taboo that exists within these communities around mental health, if it's beginning to become acknowledged under these circumstances of this crisis, or is it still being very much kept at a level of taboo? And if it is, how are we going to be able to deal with it? Because presumably, if it is just ignored, it's only going to fuel the anger and all the emotions that Nasser was expressing for kids on the streets as they grow up.
Yeah. So the question is like a complicated one because there are so many like segments of the population, even when we talk about these communities of like minority communities. So to answer your original question about the difference between Muslim Sunni and Muslim Shia communities, I personally don't know enough about either of those communities from a mental health perspective to speak to that. But I will say that the shift right now in response to this is more present focused impact on mental health. So usually in minority communities or immigrant communities, sometimes like the mother language, the tongue, doesn't have the language to describe mental health or mental illness. And so you see there's a lot of conversation around the symptoms of the illness itself. So people are more comfortable in talking about the symptoms of experiencing something as opposed to saying, I have anxiety, right? So like I'm from Pakistan and Urdu is the language we speak there. And colloquially, there is no term for anxiety. Like it just doesn't exist. So if people my age want to talk about it, they say it in English. Right. So there's a medical term that you kind of read in textbooks, but like how many people talk about things like that, right? So there is this, and that kind of reflects the collective consciousness of a culture. And I'm obviously I'm not here to like talk poorly about the culture, but that's just a gap that we have. And, you know, contemporary younger people are like moving to fill it. So I know that just in my own community here, I do see that people in my age group, a little younger, a little older, are now more comfortable in talking about it, even in response to this crisis. My mom is like in her early 60s. You know, she is twice, like two partitions, lived through two partitions, once a refugee for a short period of time in the 70s, like, you know, really worked hard to get out of that situation. So that kind of person is very stoic. And from our culture, they don't talk about feelings. You keep everything closed and you move ahead. But she, for the first time, 3 weeks ago, asked me if I was having anxiety. Like she used that word, and she used it for my sister because she's obviously going to work right now. And so you're seeing these small shifts, but it's still very like present focused. It's about here. And I wouldn't say that it's largely widespread. I would say that the conversations around stigma and taboo are still more around the symptoms of the experience, and less about the actual clinical terms. You know, very progressive religious organizations like the NYU IC Islamic Center, they have like weekly programming that is open to all ages. And every week they have something on mental health. Which is like amazing. It's amazing. There's meditation, there's journaling, there's how to manage anxiety.
That's brilliant.
They bring in Muslim counselors and therapists. So that's good, you know, because a very large audience is seeing it. But, you know, unfortunately, through segments of the population, you know, the folks who are perhaps not as well off or not as educated, I wouldn't say that this will change anything because they're in survival mode right now, right? Like, they don't have the luxury to take a step back and say, hey, let me think about how I'm feeling when they're worried about food and housing and money. Yeah.
Naz, we interviewed a chef in the city, an Australian chef in the city called Robert Marchetti, who moved here from Australia about 18 months ago to open up a place in Soho called Grand Tivoli. And
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And we were talking about the legacy of celebrity chefs and the shouting, the screaming, the abuse that happens in kitchens. I would expect that today this military style exercise that's going on, it must be a very different environment in the kitchens that you're working in at the moment to deliver this relief effort to people. Yes and no. You still have to manage the stress of being able to keep up the numbers you're keeping up.
So I think is there a lot of abuse that happens in kitchens? Absolutely. Is there a lot of breaking down of egos and personalities in kitchens? Yes. Are you humbled? That's a proper way of probably saying that you're just put down to the floor, stepped on and just told to shut the fuck up. Yeah, that happens all the time. Is it a difficult place for women? Yes. Is it a difficult place for women who are queer? Absolutely. Like, It's an awful environment. It got better, but in general, it's not the case. However, like in our kitchens, I think it's probably understood. It's very understood in all kitchens that even if you're beat down to the core by your superior chef or managing chef or whatever, afterwards you usually go out and have a good time and have a beer. But that does not include men and women, right? Mm-hmm. It's mostly like a men bonding thing, which is also a problem within kitchens itself. That's why like women-led kitchens tend to be better, more inclusive, better access to services and things like that, where men-led kitchens is a problem. So I'll give you an example. Chef Ryan Graham. Chef Ryan Graham is a mentor of mine, a brother of mine. The guy right now, before I just got on the phone with you, was out in the woods, like forging ramps, right? Because he wants to make hummus with ramps for disaster relief effort. He's hunting them. Like, what kind of a Renaissance man is that? But when he loses it in the kitchen, it's a scary sight. He lost it on me last Thursday because Al Jazeera was in the house filming, and it got so loud, so bad, so confrontational, right? Because he was already under a lot of stress, pushing out all these thousands of plates, that people came out and thought like he's gonna stab me in the neck. And like, you know, like, and we had to like, here's how you do it. Like back when I was younger, like he would shout back, he would fight back, and all. Some people would throw down in the middle of the thing, right? But as you get older, you know, like this is just happening now. 10 minutes later, we'll be okay, right? Just eat it and ignore, right? Eat it and ignore. But yeah, I mean, I went through my, you know, share of that. Abusive, one of the most abusive, toxic mentally health places I worked in was Dallas Barbecue. I have no problem shouting them out. They're a piece of shit place. And these guys, oh wait, can you get sued for this or no? Okay, good. All right. So no, I mean, I'm for you. I mean, I don't care. No. Yeah, man, these guys are like, they completely not only integrated like oppression and like or sort of like you know, this oppressive kitchen environment. They also integrated racism, right? So they would only hire Bengali packers. They would only hire Mexican cooks, and they will only hire Black waiters and Latino busboys, right? So everybody became a clique. It became like that show Oz on prison, right? And the way that people talk to each other, the way that they use racism and derogatory forms is insane. It became like racism is such a high impact in that place. Even from people against their own people, it becomes a problem. And then it destroys you mentally. So when you exit and leave work, you're going down so beat that you don't think you can do better in life. That's why a lot of waiters there stay 20, 30 years and they don't move. It's crazy.
Well, I mean, we know we're going to come out of this lockdown situation, and that we'll, you know, however flat that curve gets in the respite that we have during summer. Looking forward, what do you see as the longer term prospect for your industry, Naz, and also how do you think that the mental health, the positives that will come out of this, maybe you mentioned, Israa, about organizations taking mental health more seriously. I'm looking for a little bit of maybe optimism, but if you think there's going to be, if you want to paint a more dystopian or negative picture, please, you know, be open and honest as to what you think we have coming up.
You want to go first, Israa?
Yeah, sure. So in my perspective and the trends that I'm seeing, I am hopeful that the mental health industry will change a little. We're already seeing, and again, it comes out of this like adversity. And once something is out there, it's very hard to claw back, right? So like within state borders, you're starting to see them lax the regulations. So a therapist in New Jersey can provide services to somebody in Manhattan right now. You know, we are working to provide services across state lines. And so that will be a great way to improve access all over the country, right? So I think once it's out there, it's hard to really claw back definitively from the consciousness of people once they've benefited from it. So I do think that some of the changes that have happened are going to if not change the status quo immediately, but like start pushing towards that in a more constructive way. So like loosened regulations across state lines is something that's happening. And I hope that we can continue that. Loosened regulations around telehealth and accessing therapy remotely. There was a lot of red tape around that, like where the therapist should be and where the person can be and all that stuff. Again, that's limiting people from getting services. So now they've started changing that. Employers are now very, very interested in the mental health of their workers, because people, again, in certain industries are working from home now and their mental health is deteriorating, and they're getting a lot of absenteeism or presenteeism. People are like dropping off from the workforce. So employers are reaching out and needing and wanting to make their EAPs or their employment assistance program or their mental health benefits more robust. Yeah. And I've also seen a small change in insurance companies. So the American healthcare system is obviously a beast of its own, but insurance companies are now paying a little more attention to mental health and needing to integrate it into their like offerings. But what happens with that, I don't know, because insurance companies are, they're tricky to navigate, but they are now paying attention to it. So you're seeing this like shift in understanding that mental health is just as important as physical health. So I am hoping that that's something that is a lasting legacy out of this. And then on the consumer side, again, like I said, there are people who are becoming more aware. They're becoming a little more comfortable in asking for help. And now whether this changes the entire population is yet to be seen. But there is a sharp increase in mental health literacy right now. People are curious about what's going on with them and seeking information through Google, through, all of these services. So
yeah, it's fascinating. We have, and what I do outside the podcast, we've got a web design business, and we've got 3 psychotherapy clients, and all of them have asked us to build pages for them on mental health resources. Yeah. And I think it's the most wonderful around coronavirus, obviously, and it's the most wonderful thing to witness the amount of literature and content that is out there at the moment that's educating people around mental wellness and mental health and actions they need to take and destigmatizing this. I did a panel last May around turning mental illness and focusing on mental wellness and around the stigma. And it's amazing, almost a year on, what the impact that this virus is having on that. So I think I'm very optimistic about the societal impact, albeit there will maybe be more anxiety coming out of this, but I think we'll be better prepared as a society. So Naz, what about your perspective from inside your industry?
Well, I mean, like I mentioned, I'm heavily plugged into this industry, not just in the States, but like globally. I'm part of Social Gastromotiva, which brings all the best chefs in the world in one place. I also do gastro diplomacy missions with the State Department and work with data firms and like Stanford University on the future of food and things like that. So the way that we're looking at it right now is that we truly believe that up to 75% of restaurants are not going to make it in the next 6 months. Immediate impact is around 30 to 40% of people that are going to shut down. I have to say that outside of the fact that I'm going to lose some of my, best places to go eat, I'm not necessarily that mad or upset about the fact that restaurant industry are losing their footing. The restaurant industry was toxic. It exploited people of color. It exploited undocumented workers. It exploited women. And I hope that when it rebuilds, and it will rebuild, just like the financial crisis, just like anything else, it will be built. It will take some time. It'll be painful. But I hope it doesn't come back to where it was, right? Where you'll walk into Ilili or you'll walk into 11 Madison Park or you'll walk into Nomad and you're only going to see Anglo-Saxon beautiful women on the floor and everybody that's Black and Latino and brown is in the back of the kitchen, right? People of color cannot be promoted. Things that are obscenely disgusting and racist. So I'm not really that sad about the industry going away. Like, yeah, it sucks. A lot of waiters are now out of work. Look, I get it. I was out of work and I was homeless. Like, it's not that I don't see those things and didn't experience them. But I think a also like this restaurant industry, for anybody that's listening that's in the service industry, it's toxic and it kills you, right? So you were a waiter for a long, long time, but I'm pretty sure it was a side job until you decided that, you know, this is your career now because any other project or acting thing or singing thing didn't work out. So maybe like what happens when you get 50, right? When you become 50 years old and your knees can't carry you anymore. So maybe this is a good shift for everybody to exit the industry into something that actually can give them security. There's no security in waiting tables. There's no security in like cooking and dunking fries. I mean, I got really lucky. Sorry, did I get cut off?
Yeah,
sorry.
you're okay.
Yeah, I got really lucky to, you know, be recognized, you know, around the globe. We're the best chefs, and, you know, a TV show coming up or whatever. But like these things, you know, like don't happen to anyone. Like my mentor worked harder for me than 20 years, and, you know, he didn't get this kind of access. That's why he keeps calling me Rachel Ray, which is like a fake TV chef. But, you know, the truth is that like it's luck. It's really luck, and we have to recognize your blessings and try to, you know, move it forward. You know, nobody's that special. Even these best chefs, Gordon, everybody, nobody's that special.
So a couple of things then. Solutions, or how people can help you. You've got a GoFundMe page. We'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Thank you.
Are there any other things you want to make people aware of where they can help? If they want to volunteer, some people might want to come and volunteer that weren't aware of it.
Absolutely. If they want to come volunteer in packaging only, then they're more than welcome to, or they want to deliver food, they're more than welcome to. The reason that we do that is that everybody in the kitchen has to be vetted with a DOH license and has to have experience and have to get tested every morning. So there absolutely will be no way that anybody can volunteer in the kitchen. But packaging, delivery, we're more than happy. Logistics, PR, call World Central Kitchen and tell them that we're amazing. You know, that's something that, you know, we would love to have so we can increase output. And I hope that we get through this. But I also hope that by the end of all of this, in New York City as an entity, as a city, as a people, will eat migrant food. And that makes me proud. I want to showcase Jackson Heights. I want to showcase Patterson, New Jersey, Bay Ridge, and America how I see it, at least, through the eyes of everyone, including yourself, you know, who also immigrated here and tried to make a better life.
Yeah. And Israa, what resources would you point people to if they need help?
Sure. I mean, I think in terms of mental health, I would recommend the CDC. Absolutely. They have a whole section. NYC Well has a lot of resources right now. They have a crisis hotline if you are experiencing any kind of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. They have hotlines and resources over there. If you're looking for general wellness reading, you can find me on the internet. It's nasser-jaber.com.
Put that in the show notes.
Yeah, or you can find me on Instagram, well.guide. I put up a lot of content that you can just kind of integrate into your daily practice to help manage how you're feeling right now. Yeah.
Okay. And Naz, where would
I sat on one of those
Instagram?
things. They were amazing.
Thank you.
And Naz, where would people find you on Instagram?
So now we have a PR company. I have an assistant, so I'm not allowed to give out my personal, but if you want to follow it, it's at nasjab83. Before that, you have to follow at the Migrant Kitchen on Instagram. We also have at the Migrant Kitchen NYC on Facebook. And yeah, that's it.
Okay. And you mentioned, like you dropped in there a little thing about a TV show. Are you a budding Anthony Bourdain?
I can't get into the details, but this was supposed to be 2021, officially signed with a large streaming provider. But it will be now for 2022. But I will definitely send out the trailer in the next 3 months.
Great. Look forward to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, listen, I really thank you for your time. It's been really brilliant.
Thank you for having us. It means a lot that you're showcasing, you know, our culture and our people, because we don't have that kind of platform. So thank you.
Well, I'll definitely be connecting you with a few people outside of this as well that I know. Well, and in fact, one of our guests, upcoming guest, is our client, Tara Andrami. She's an Iranian a psychologist here in the city, has her practice. Oh. And I know that she'll probably want to connect with you and have a chat. So
yeah, I would love that. Thanks so much, Mark. This was a really good conversation. Great.
Well, thank you very much.
Awesome.
Keep up the good work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Speak soon.
Stay safe, stay healthy. Love you guys.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.